Welcome to Live DAF, your online DAF Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to today's DAF. Bava Metzia, DAF Yud Gimel. We are holding 11 lines off the top of the Amud. Abaya Omar Edav Bechasumov Zachanlay. Abaya is coming to answer a question. You see, we had a Mishnah in Bava Basra. You can write a shtar, a loan document, if the loiva, borrower, walks into Bezdin, he asks us to draft him a shtar chayv, we can do that, even though we don't necessarily see the lender here. We don't see them doing their transaction, no money changing hands in our presence. We can proceed with drafting the document. And the question would be, well, maybe he's not going to get around to borrowing the money for months. And this shtar, which will be used down the road, will be technically predated, which would enable the lender to collect, to reappropriate properties, right, that were purchased after the date written in the document, which is technically still pre-loan, right, before the loan was actually issued. So that was the question. Ramasi said that we're speaking about a special shtar called shtar hakna'ah, where there's a special clause where the loiva, the borrower, commits. He's meshabed all his assets from that moment onward. So there's no issue of predating because there's an instant shibud. Abaye Omar, I have a different approach, says Abaye. Edav b'chasumov, when the witnesses affix their signatures onto the shtar, zachnai. That's it. That triggers a shibud. Everything is now committed to the loan, irrespective of when the actual loan is issued. So every shtar works like that. You don't need a special shtar hakna. Even if it's a regular shtar, not called a shtar hakna, the Edom do that. Why did Abaye choose this approach? Mishum de kashli. Because he had a problem, he had a kasha with the other approach. Kiva de amrs. Once you say b'shtarei de lav hakna, that if it's a shtar that does not have that extra special clause called hakna, which was Ravasi's approach to things, if you're going to tell me without that hakna aspect, we'll never write a shtar like that. We'll never draft a shtar chayv without hakna. If there's no malva, there's no lender handing over the money in our presence, like hasfinan. Right? So then, if that's in fact true, so leka lamechash ikri v'kasav, you can never have any suspicion that they actually proceeded. The sefer actually drafted a document which wasn't supposed to be drafted at the time. And if that's the case, back to the Mishnah. We had a Mishnah, right? A person's walking down the road and finds a shtar. If the shtar enables the lender to collect from assets that was sold post-loan, it's called achrayas nechasim. Don't give it back. Don't return it to the malva. Why? Maybe it's predated. What do you mean? Who writes predated? Right? So maybe, ikri v'kasav. Once you found it on the street, that casts doubt on the validity of the shtar. Perhaps it was dropped because it wasn't really worth much, right? So it was predated, meaning that the sefer actually mistakenly gave the loiva, he drafted a shtar for the loiva, even though there was no malva here, even though there was no loan issued in front of him. That was Rav Asi's approach. Abaye disagrees. You're not meant to do that, so why should we be chayshish that in fact it happened? Therefore, Abaye takes a different approach to things. He says, you can draft a loan document and give it to the loiva, even though there's no malva here, there's no loan being issued today, because edav b'chasumov zachalei. It's an automatic trigger. Once the Edom sign their names, the shibud gets activated immediately. It's an instant shibud. Okay, then the question will be, so if you find a shtar in the street, any shtar, just give it back to the malva. There's no issue of predating. Guess what? The Gemara later will ask this kasha. But first, another kasha. Elohadisnan. What about a Mishnah later on in Bava Metzia, coming up soon? Motza giti noshim, v'shichruri avodim. So this fellow is walking down the street, picks up a get, picks up a shtar shichrur of an eved, a document which frees the Eved, right? The Yataki. Rashi says the Yataki is a sort of a shortened version of 3 words. Da tehe, da teku. Basically, it's a tzava of a shchimura. A person's deathly ill. He writes this will. It's called the Yataki, where he's sort of giving away things, right? Matana, an ordinary gift document. V'shevarim, some sort of receipt. So you find out on the street, what do you do? Don't return to the owner. Perhaps it was drafted, right? It's authentic, but it was never activated. And the fellow changed his mind, never actually carried out the transaction. So he never gave it over to the recipient. So just hold on to it, don't give it back. Asks the Gemara, hold it. Even if the fellow who drafted changed his mind, who cares? You, Abaye just told us that once we have Edom affixed to that star, that's it, it triggers a shibud. Right? So no harm can be done by giving it back to the Malva. He deserves a shibud. Well, said the Gemara, that's true. Only if it happened, ultimately, there was some sort of transaction. So even if it was drafted before the actual event, it triggers an instant shibud. So there's no issue of dating. But that's true when ultimately it got to the recipient. But if it never got to the recipient, there was never a transaction that actually occurred. We don't activate any shibudim, any liens, any loans, any commitments. Okay, now back to our Mishnah. The most obvious kasha. According to Abaye, Eida b'chasum and zachan loy. So Elamas Nisan Niktana, what about our Mishnah? Where we learn, Matzah Shtar Chayiv. If you're walking down the street and you find a Shtar Chayiv, Im Yesh Behem Achrais Nachosim, if that Shtar empowers the potential lender, the Malva, to collect from assets sold post-loan, well, yeah, so don't give it back to him. Why? Vokimna, we have established, we have explained before. Kisha Chayav here is the obligated party, meaning the borrower. Moide, he concedes to the validity of the shtar. Sure, it's a fine shtar. So why shouldn't you give it back to the lender? And we learned yesterday, because perhaps it was predated. Umishum, because Shema Kosav Lulvais ben Nisan. Maybe he wrote it Nisan time, but he actually never borrowed until Tishrei. 6 months later, Lava Tishrei. And by giving back the shtar to the Malva, by returning it to him, you're enabling him, you're empowering him to collect assets, to go expropriate nechasim that were purchased after Nisan, past the date written in the shtar, which is really technically pre-loan. Okay, now, that's the Mishnah. Bishlam le Rav Asi. Now, according to Rav Asi's approach, the first approach in the sugya, the Amar B'shtar HaKnaisa, who explains that the other Mishnah of Bava Basra, which allows us to give the loiva a shtar even without the malva present, is speaking specifically about a special shtar called Shtar HaKnaisa, which has that extra clause in it where the loiva commits to an instant shibud from that moment onward. Right? So only then does it allay any concern, does it address any concern of predating. So Mukila, so now he explains the Mishnah over here, which seems to have a concern, b'shtar idlav HaKnaisa. As we explained yesterday, it's not that special shtar, it doesn't have the akna clause in it. So the shibud only gets triggered when the actual event, the loan actually is issued, which we don't know when happened. We don't know when it happened. So we don't return it. That's good. But according to approach number 2, which was today's sugya, the Edom triggered the shibud on any shtar from the moment of signing. Michael Imemus, what's the concern? It's an authentic shtar, valid signatures. Just give it back to the Malva. Abaye responds with a new concern. The reason why our Mishnah is concerned and doesn't allow us to return it, perhaps they were wheeling and dealing with each other. These two parties, Reuven and Shimon, the alleged borrower Shimon with the lender Reuven, are plotting. He already repaid the loan, but he's piroin, right? So concerned that it was repaid, but now he is conceding the borrower, the former borrower who already paid up his loan. Shimon is advising us to return the shtar to Ruvain. No, it's a legitimate, authentic, valid shtar. Why? L'knunya. He's willing and dealing with this Ruvain fellow. Look, take back the shtar, pretend it was not paid up, and go after my customers. Go take back property which I sold past this loan, and we'll split 50-50. Therefore, says Abaye, even if the loiva agrees to give it back, don't give it back. Okay, so bottom line, let's just recap. Mishnah says you find the shtar chayv, which enables you to collect from mishubadim, from customers who purchased properties post loan. Don't give it back. Don't return the shtar to the malva. Why? 2 reasons. Rav Asi says we're concerned that perhaps the shtar is predated. Why would we have that concern? Because it was a shtar floating in the street, which casts suspicion on its validity and its accuracy. According to Abaye, typically the Edom trigger the shibud from that moment onward. There's no issue of predating. But we're concerned about piroin and knunya. Asks the Gemara, L'shmuel da'amar lichashina lepiroin l'knunya. According to Shmuel, who teaches us a bit later on the Fidalet, we're not concerned that they're, in cahoots. The Malv and the Leva are planning to deal against the customers. Michael remembers. Then how do we explain our mission's concern? So now, if Shmuel goes like Rav Asi's approach, that the only time our concerns are addressed, only situation which removes the predated concern is dafka when it's shtarei hakno, when the shtar has that added element where the loiva specifically be mishabed from today on. So he learns that our Mishnah is talking that he found a shtar that's a standard shtar that does not have that hakno factor. I'm concerned that perhaps it was predated. Okay, so according to that approach, we're good. But if, let's say, we suppose that Shmuel goes on Abaye's track, that the Edom in every shtar trigger an instant shibud, Michael Amemra. So why not return the shtar? Now, according to Abaye, it was a knunya concern, but Shmuel doesn't hold of knunya, so we're stuck. Answers the Gemara, Shmuel will have a third track to explain the Mishnah. Shmuel mukil masnisin. Shmuel explains that our Mishnah, which doesn't allow us to return the shtar to the malva, is speaking when the chayav, the loiva, is not admitting. He's opposing the validity of the shtar. It's paid up, it's forged, whatever. So that's our concern. Now we have no right to return it to the malva against the loiva's wishes. If that's the case, so why does the Mishnah make that distinction between a shtar that contains that achrayis nechasim clause, which enables the holder to collect from property purchasers? There we have a concern, don't give it back. But if it's ein bar achrayis nechasim, it doesn't have that ability, you can't collect from buyers. So the Mishnah says, give it back to the malva. Why? Why return it? True, you can't get from the properties that have been sold. But you can collect from available assets in the hands of the leiv, and he's yelling and screaming. Shtar is no good, so what right do we have to return it to the malva? Answer is Shmuel, the Thu May Shmuel is following his opinion. Damar Shmuel says, Rav Meir, who makes this distinction, he holds that a shtar chayv she'ein bo achrayis nechasim, a shtar chayv without the achrayis nechasim clause is worthless. It's not a legal document. Ein goyve loy mishabdi v'loy mibnei chari. Here comes the punchline. Not only can't you collect from mishabatim, but you can't even collect from assets that the leiva has available. Basically, Rashi explains it's like a milval pes, like a verbal loan, because it doesn't have the elements of a shtar, of a legal document. It doesn't have the mishabadim power. So basically, there's no harm in giving it back to the malva. You can't do anything with it anyway. So why giving it back? If you can't collect with it, why return it? Rabbi Nassim Roshia to use that as a bottle cap. Well, the malva wants it to cover its bottle. Okay, just a plain parchment paper. So just give it to the leiva as well. He can use it as a bottle stopper. So well, he's denying the validity of the shtar. Leiva who the amar, isn't the leiva yelling and screaming? It never happened, it's forged, so he doesn't deserve the paper back either. Okay, before we continue, let's just summarize. We have 3 approaches to the Mishnah, 3 tracks. Ravasi, Abaye, and Shmuel. Again, the Mishnah says, you find a star in the street, which enables you to collect from a Shabbat, don't give it back. Ravasi learns because we're concerned that perhaps the fact that it's floating around the street is an indication of some suspicion on the star. Perhaps it's inaccurate. It was written before it was issued. Before the loan was issued, it's a star mukdam, it's predated, and we don't want unjust collections. Abaye says that wouldn't be a concern because Edav b'chasumov zachanlai, they trigger an instant shibur as it's being written and signed. Rather, the concern is perhaps it had been paid up, and now the Malv and the Leva are both in cahoots to go and recollect from the assets and split it amongst them. So, according to Rav Asi and Abaye, both are speaking where the Leva agrees. He admits shtar is fine, but still we have these concerns. According to Shmuel, we're speaking that the Leva is in disagreement. He's opposing the shtar. That explains why we don't give it back. Now, if there's no achrayis nechasim, there's no issue giving it back because he can't do anything with it anyway. Okay, now come Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yehuda to explain the other aspect of our Mishnah. You see, if you recall, we had a machlekes between Rabbi Meir, who says the concern is only when there's achrayis nechasim in the shtar, which allows me to access those properties that were sold. But otherwise, give it back. Rabbanan say, regardless of whether it has the achrayis nechasim in the shtar or not, don't give it back. So they're going to endeavor to explain this machlekes, and through this discussion, we will have a window into how they are learning the entire sugya. What exactly is the concern of our Mishnah? And interestingly, Rabbi Lezer, which is the first shita coming up, he's going to be going with Shmuel's approach. That that there's no concern of Piroin and Knunya, right? That was Shmuel's approach. And Rabbi Yehuda is going to be going with the other approach. Let's see. Amar Rabbi Lezer, Achlekes, this discussion between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim and the Mishnah, B'she'en chayav meida, is speaking where the Leva is opposing the shtar, right? So what's the Machlekes? The Rabbi Meir Savar, he holds shtar she'en ba'achrayis nachos. If a shtar does not contain this clause which allows a lender to collect from purchased properties, it's worthless, as we just explained, because Rav Lezer and Shmuel are on the same track. Not only can't you collect from a purchaser, from a buyer, from a customer, you can't even collect from assets that are available. You can't use the shtar to collect. And therefore, there's no harm in giving it back to the Malva. For Rabbanan Sabri, they disagree. A shtar that has no achrayis nechasim, yeah, you're right. You can't collect from buyers. But mibnei chari, from available assets that are free and available by the leiva migul gabi, you can collect. So therefore, you have no right to give back to the malva who caused the leiva harm. But suppose the leiva is in full agreement that the shtar is legitimate and real. The Rakol Yachshir all agree. Return it to the malva. We're not concerned that it was paid up, and they're both in cahoots, teaming up against the buyers. So this is almost like a carbon copy of Shmuel's approach to the Mishnah. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda Amar, he disagrees. Machlekes k'shechayev moed. He's taking the first approach, more like Rav Asi and Abaye. The discussion now Mishnah pertains to a case where the leiva is agreeing, shtar is fine, and still we have a concern. We have a concern about a predated shtar. The Rameir Sav Rameir holds shtar she'en ba'achrayis nechosim, shtar which does not have the achrayis element, mimeshavdi deloy gabi. Aval mibnei chari migvagabi. Rameir holds that a shtar without achrayis doesn't enable the holder to collect from a shubadim, although it does enable it to collect from available assets. Therefore, says Rameir, if the shtar with achrayis, you can't give it back because you might cause the lekuchos, the buyer's harm. Right? Because as we said, maybe it was predated, it's not accurate, but otherwise give it back. Even though the malva will collect from available assets, that's fine, because the leiv is okay, he's conceding to the validity of the shtar. The Rabbanan Sabri, they hold no. Mimeshabdi gami gabi. Even if there's no achrayis specifically written in the shtar, it still empowers him to collect from lekuchos, from buyers. Rashi says achrayis to seiferhu. the missing clause is assumed to have been an inadvertent omission on account of the scribe. So basically, every shtar has the same power. All shtaris, whether they have the explicit achrayis written in them or not, still allows them to collect from Shabbatim. So we don't want to give it back to the Malva because he might go and use the shtar to collect from Shabbatim from the date posted in the shtar, which might be inaccurate. But let's say the loiva is yelling and screaming, "Don't give it back! It's forged or whatever." All agree, you don't give it back to the Malva. The Chayshin and the Purim concerned, perhaps it was paid up. So bottom line, these two approaches, Rabbi Lezer's approach and Rabbi Yechon's approach, pretty much mirror the approaches we had earlier, which is basically that Rabbi Lezer is not concerned about Piroin and Knunya. Nobody's teaming up. We're not concerned about dishonest people, which corresponds to Shmuel's approach, right? And Rabbi Yechon is concerned about Piroin and Knunya. That corresponds to the first approach, which was Abaye's approach. Here comes a brisa. Tanik of Aseder Rabbi Yechonon, v'tiyufta the Rabbi Lezer b'chada, v'tiyufta the Shmuel b'tarti. We're going to have one brisa, which on the one hand will support Rabbi Yechon's approach to things, that we are concerned about Piroin and Knunya, and it's going to be a kasha on Rabbi Lezer on one aspect, and a kasha on Shmuel on two aspects. Let's see. Here comes a brayse. Motzer shtari chayv. A fellow discovered a shtar chayv in the street. V'yesh b'hem achrayis nechasim, which has the achrayis clause in it. Aval b'sheshneim moedim. Even if the two parties, Reuben and Shimon, the alleged lender and borrower, are both in full agreement that the shtar is legitimate and real, lo yachzer, lo yilazeh v'lo yilazeh. He can't return it to the malva or the leiva. Why? Why? Because we're concerned about Knunya, right? Maybe they're teaming up to collect from the unsuspecting buyers, and they're going to go split the loot, right? Let's say the shtar does not enable collection from the lekuchis, so it depends. If the borrower, Shimon, right, he concedes to the shtar, so yeah, no harm is done. Yachshel Malva, you can return it to the Malva, let him collect with it, because he's not going to access Mishubadim, he's only going to collect from the Leiva himself, fine. If he's in agreement, be my guest, right? But let's say the Leiva is opposing the shtar. In this case, you can't return it to the Malva or the Leiva. Shita. Why? Because even though it doesn't have a achrayis, you can still collect from Bnei Chayrin. Which actually was another point that Rabbi Yechonon made. You see, Rabbi Lezer said that if it doesn't have achrayis nechasim, it's worthless according to Rabbi Meir. No harm in returning it. You can't do anything with it anyway. The Brisa clearly says otherwise. That's another kasha on Rabbi Lezer, right? Right? This is Rabbi Meir speaking. If it has no achrayis, fine, you're safe regarding the kuchis. But still, if the leiva is yelling and screaming, don't give it back to the malva, you can't give it back to him because it's still going to enable him to collect from the leiva's assets. Rabbi Meir used to tell us, if the shtar has achrayis, right? But if it doesn't have the achrayis, although you can't collect from a shabadim, but you still collect from nechasim nechern. The Chacham say no. They say that even if there's no achrayis nechasim stated in the shtar, it doesn't matter whether it has it in or not. Doesn't have it in it. We still treat it the same way. Goiva min nechasim shabadim, you can collect from the customers, and therefore according to the Chachamim, even if the shtar does not state achrayis nechasim, you still can't give it back. End of Bryce. And what's the summary here? Tiyuf to the Rabbi Lezer b'chad. So first of all, before we start with the kashas, it's a clear support to Rabbi Yechon's approach on many fronts. Firstly, you see the Bryce is concerned about Knunya, right? Concerned that perhaps the Malva and the Levi are teaming up with each other, as we explained before. We also see that according to Rabbi Meir, a shtar with achrayis, although you can't collect from a shabbat, but it's still a kasher shtar, which allows you to collect from the Levi's personal, available assets. Okay, so it's a right to Rabbi Yechonon, but now it's tiyufta the Rabbi Lezer b'chada. It's going to be a kasha on Rabbi Lezer on one aspect. Why? Because Rabbi Lezer told us Liter of Meir, according to Rabbi Meir, shtar she'em bar acharis nechasim, right? A shtar doesn't have achrayis is worthless, right? It's a worthless piece of paper. Einoi goyve min nechasim mishubadim, right? For like nechas bnei chayr, you can't use it for anything. And the Brisa clearly stated otherwise. The Brisa told us. And one second, that's number one. Number two, what else did Rabbi Yehuda tell us? We're not concerned about Kanunya. He told us, Ben Rab Meir, Ben Rabbanon, Lo Yichashin LeKanunya. And the Brisa clearly says otherwise on both accounts. Number one, the Brisa says, Shtar She'em Bar Acharis Nechosim. A shtar without achrayis. Yeah, I mean, Mishabdu Legabi, you can't collect from Mishabadim, according to Rabbi Meir. But Havim Bnei Chayr Migim Legabi, you can collect from available assets. That's firstly. Number two, Uktani, and the Brisa also tells us, Bein Rab Meir, Bein Rabbanon, we are concerned that perhaps the Malva and the Levi are teaming up to allege that the shtar is legitimate and there's an outstanding balance need to be collected, and they'll go collect from the buyers and split the loot. The Ketani, because the Brisa clearly tells us, Aval Pisha Shnei Moed, even if they're both in agreement. Lo Yachzer, Lo Ylezer, you can't return the shtar. Alma, why? Chayshin L'Knunya. So basically, it's a strong kasha on Rabbi Lezer, who disagrees with both aspects. Asks the Gemara, 1 second. Vahani Tarti. Who? So why are we saying that there's only one kasha on Rabbi Lezer? You just told me two things. Knunya, and the other point that the shtar has validity even though there's no achrayis. Says the Gemara, you're right, technically it's two, but chadahu. We can still consider both things as one. Why? The chad tamhu. It's like a chain, meaning one is based on the other. I mean, what does that mean? You see, because of where Rabbi Lezer was coming from in terms of interpreting the Mishnah, that sort of triggered this chain reaction, which led him to both conclusions, which are opposed in the Brisa. So really, it's two, but it's rooted in one. It's coming from one source, so that's why we call it one. But you're right, it's really two separate things. The Mishum Deka Amar Rabbi Lezer, since Rabbi Lezer started by explaining Machlokes v'shein chayav moed, that the discussion now Mishnah between Rameh and the Rabbanon are where the moida, the chayav, the loiva is not agreeing to the shtar, he's opposing the validity of the shtar. Chayav moida, right? He's claiming that it's forged. Shein chayav moida, and the machlekes the Mishnah is whether you can still return it according to Rabbi Meir. When it has no achrayis, you can return it. You're safe because it can't be used for anything. Chachamim disagree. Right? That led into the whole pshat of Rabbi Lezer. That's why it led him to explain the Mishnah this way: that a shtar without achrayis according to Rabbi Meir is worthless. Therefore, there's no harm in returning it. And that was the whole pshat, right? So. The next part was that, but if the Leva is admitting to the validity of the shtar, then you could give it back. And we're not concerned about the Knunya. So basically it's all unwrapped, it's all bundled together, one thing led to the next. That's what we call it one. But really, technically, there are two separate elements that are refuted from this Brisa. Okay, now, Tiyufta de Shmuel B'tarti. When it comes to Shmuel, we have two separate refutations from this Brisa. Chadak Rabbi Lezer, number one, like Rabbi Lezer, the Homuki Masnisen, B'Shein Chayav Moed, because Rabbi Lezer and Shmuel, as we explained, are on the same track in terms of how did they explain the Mishnah. The concern is where the Lev is not agreeing, etc., etc. V'chada. Additionally, there's another kasha on Shmuel from the Brisa. Damar Shmuel tells us, Motzo shtar hakno b'shuk. Let's say a person finds a shtar hakno in the street. Remember, the shtar hakno means that it explicitly states that the loiva is triggering the shibud from that moment. Right? So there's no issue of predated. The shibud, the commitment, the lien was triggered at that point. No harm is done. There's no concern. Yachshal abal. You give back to the imal, but let him collect with it. Even though the loiva is in full disagreement, he's opposing the authenticity of the shtar. You can still give it back to the malva. And we're not concerned. We're not going to submit to the loiva's argument that the shtar had been paid up already. No. We say, look, it's paid up. Why is it here? Typically, when a shtar is paid up, you tear it up. So piroin is not on the agenda. On that we're going to ask from this brisa to yufta. Why? Because in our brisa we do see a concern about piroin, that it was paid up. Brisa says even if the Malva and Loiva are both in cahoots, they're both in full agreement that it's okay, don't return it. Why? Apparently, there is a concern that the shtar had been paid up. Certainly in Shmuel's case, where the Loiva is yelling and screaming, is opposing the shtar, the chashin lepuroin. Certainly, there would be reason to be concerned that it was in fact paid up, as per the Loiva's argument, and Shmuel clearly says otherwise. There's no concern about piroin, otherwise shtar would have been ripped up. So there's another kasha on Shmuel from the Bryce. Okay, a bit complicated piece of Gemara. Let's just try to simplify it as much as possible. We had a Mishnah. Starting point is our Mishnah. You find the shtar chayv in the street, don't return it. Why? So we have three tracks: Rav Asi, Abaye, and Shmuel. According to Rav Asi and Abaye, we're speaking that the loiva is admitting, he's in full agreement regarding the validity of the shtar. Still, we don't return it. According to Rav Asi, concerned that perhaps the shtar was written before the actual loan was issued, it's a predated shtar, which messes up the whole collection process. According to Abaye, concern is otherwise. The concern is that perhaps the shtar was real, was legitimate, a loan was issued, it was such a good shtar, it was already paid up. Concern is perhaps the Mav and the Leva are in cahoots to try to deprive the Lekuches of their assets. They're pretending that the shtar is still outstanding, they're going to collect on it, and then they're going to split the loot. According to Shmuel, we're not concerned about Piroin and Knunya. Rather, we're speaking that the Leva is arguing against the shtar. He says it's forged, etc. So, in that case, how could you return it? Right? And let's just basically summarize Amud Beis in the following manner. There was a couple of separate discussions regarding. Basically, there were a few issues here which are disputed. One is, let's say a shtar has no achrayis nechasim. It doesn't have that element within it that empowers it doesn't say that the Malv is going to collect from the assets that have been sold post-loan. Right? Do we say it deprives the Malva, it disables the Malva from doing that? Or do we say achrayis to sefer? It's an inadvertent omission, but it's standard for every shtar, and he's still empowered to do so. That's one shayla. There's another shayla. Shtar that has no achrayis nechasim, does it have any value? According to Rav Meir, right? Perhaps there's one approach here. According to Rav Meir, that's worthless. Shtar without achrayis is worthless. Okay, that was one shayla. Another shayla. There's a shayla whether we're concerned about Piroin and Knunya. Okay, that pretty much sums things up, and leaves us with several explanations regarding our Mishnah. All the best to you, and Hatzlacha Rabbah.